Okay, so welcome to Barry's Book Reviews. Today I'm reviewing a short story called Photoshop Murder by Kim Young-ha. And Kim is, of course, hugely successful with a very long career. And I've already reviewed several of his books on the channel, so please go and watch some of those reviews. And if you look at some of the older videos, you can also see an event like a book talk concert event where Chris Lee interviews Kim Young-ha. So please go and watch that video as well if you have time. But yeah, so this is a short story we're talking about today. And it's actually quite interesting. This is one of his older works. In recent years, Kim Young-ha, he's become extremely famous and popular as a podcaster, as a travel writer, and as an essay writer. So there were several years where Kim, I don't think he published any fiction. He came back after this sort of fiction break with a novel called Diary of a Murderer, I think. And but he's very, very famous and very popular for doing all of these different things, podcasting, travel writing, and so on. But this is one of his earlier works. So Kim actually debuted all the way back in 1995, so getting on for 3 decades now. And this story was published in 1999, so like I said, near the beginning of his career. The English translation of this book is by Jason Rhodes, and it was published in 2003 as part of the Portable Library of Korean Literature. And that was a series published by Jimundang Publishing Company. And I've reviewed several of the titles from that collection. It's a super interesting collection. It might be a little difficult to get these books now. If you look on Amazon, for example, some of the books in the Jimundang series, they're like $200 or $300 listed as, and you don't see these even in bookshops in Seoul that often anymore. You used to see them every now and again. But if you can get your hands on these books, they really are fantastic. And I'm very excited to own the full collection. You can see the full collection here. So this is the Jimundang series of books there. But it's a fantastic collection and there's lots of great stories. And it's definitely worth getting hold of them if you can. Like I said, this was translated by Jason Rhodes, and this is the only one of his translations that I've ever seen or read or encountered. I have no idea what he's doing now. At the time of publishing, like the bio in this book, it says that he was an assistant professor at Yonsei University. You know, Yonsei University is one of the most prestigious universities in Seoul, but I've no idea if he's still there or what he's doing. Also, another interesting thing about this story is that it was adapted into a film. So in 2004, it was adapted into a controversial film called The Scarlet Letter. That film adapted 2 of Kim Young-ha's stories. It was this story and another story which hasn't been translated yet. And it sort of blended them together into this one movie. So I've always been interested to read the other story, but like I said, it hasn't been translated yet. The film is, it really is a very good film. It's definitely worth watching. It was controversial for a few different reasons. One, because the young actress who was in the film, she committed suicide sometime after the film. So a very, very sad story, obviously, for that reason. And also because of the ending of the movie, genuinely disturbing ending to a movie. Definitely worth watching it. It's on Netflix in Korea. I don't know if it's on Netflix in your region, but I watched it on Netflix and it had English subtitles as well. So definitely worth watching. And maybe in future I might try and do a review of that movie. And so anyway, let's get to the short story. So Photoshop Murder, it's an extremely enjoyable short story, especially for fans of crime fiction and murder mysteries or detective stories. It finds Kim working in the hard-boiled crime genre, so very specifically working in that genre. and you can tell that he's having a lot of fun with the type of language and the conventions that you would expect to find in a sort of Raymond Chandler-esque, a Raymond Chandler sort of style, kind of hard-boiled crime novel. He's sort of very self-consciously working in that genre. So what is he doing with the conventions of the crime novel? So, like I said, he's very deliberately and intentionally drawing on the conventions, the tropes, and the elements of crime fiction. You know, the long or the century-long history of crime fiction. The protagonist of the story is a cynical, world-weary detective. Police detective in a major Korean city. I don't think the city is specified. Maybe I didn't pick up on the identifying features of the city. I wasn't sure if it was Seoul or maybe it was down in Busan. So I wasn't 100% sure. But it's a big city, and the narrator he narrates the story in this very ironic, irreverent manner that reminded me of the Philip Marlowe kind of narration from The Big Sleep or The Long Goodbye or something like that. And it starts with a great line. Why do murders always seem to happen on Sundays? And he's annoyed. This detective is annoyed because his day off has been interrupted by a murder. And he goes on to say, I just hoped there was only one corpse. 2 would be double the paperwork. And the story is full of these sort of kind of cynical, jaded lines and sentences like that. And so this is a man who's, he's jaded and he's cynical and sort of depressed by this sort of constant exposure to murder and violence and crime and sin in the big city, right? He sees these things every day. People, murdering each other, husbands murdering wives, people murdering lovers, attacks in the street, and corruption, and all of these other kind of things. He sees the vices of humanity on a daily basis. And then the other thing we learn about him is that, of course, his marriage is on the rocks. And this is because his wife has had an affair. So he's got lots of reasons to be cynical and depressed. And then we're introduced to the murder victim's wife. And the murder victim's wife, the new widow, is a very alluring and attractive young woman, a kind of femme fatale type of character, and she has a dark secret. And in fact, every character that we encounter seems to have some kind of sordid or dark secret. And the story is set in motion when a man who owns a photo shop is found murdered. And I guess these days, I'm not sure if these type of Photoshop places really exist in the same way, right? That we don't take a camera to the Photoshop and get our photographs developed for us, right? So it's interesting, this type of business just doesn't really exist the same way. So anyway, this man's been murdered. He was a reasonably successful man in his neighborhood. Was it his beautiful young wife? Was it her lover? Was it a disgruntled colleague or former employee or someone else altogether? And any crime fan or any detective fan, you'll recognize these elements, right? And you can tell that Kim loves this genre and that he's really enjoying playing with that genre and giving his own spin to these sort of enjoyably familiar elements, right? And of course, Kim does this quite a lot. Takes a genre and subverts it or upends expectations or kind of plays around with it, whilst also at the same time enjoying the elements that we like from this genre. So, like in Your Republic is Calling You, which is somewhere, he does the same kind of thing with the spy genre, right? But in this book, he's playing with the detective fiction. Another thing that I think is interesting about this book is that it predates the current trend for crime fiction in Korea by over a decade, I guess. In the past several years, there's been quite a significant trend for Korean crime novels. There's been several, very high-profile titles. We had The Good Son, which is kind of a serial killer story by Chong Yu-jong. We had The Disaster Tourist, which is an outlier type of crime novel that won a crime fiction award by Yoon Ko-eun. Kim Young-ha years later also did Diary of a Murderer. And we have other things like The Plotters and various other books. So there has been this sort of cycle of Korean crime novels in recent years. But Photoshop Murder was over a decade before those books. And so it's not really connected to those books in the same way. The current cycle of Korean crime novels, they're all sort of doing, some of them are kind of just genre works, but lots of them are kind of doing much more imaginative or interesting or, different things than, directly working inside the detective genre. And, Kim is sort of he's sort of deconstructing the genre a little bit and being a little bit subversive in this one too. But it's also, very much in the genre that he's kind of playing with as well. So the current, these newer Korean crime novels, they draw on things, but they're usually doing it to deconstruct something or, do something that we wouldn't necessarily see in a traditional crime novel. Kim is really engaging with the established sort of norms of detective fiction in this story. He is confounding expectations, but he's still, working directly with them. And there's just something, for me, I love detective novels. I read quite a lot of, detective fiction. I try and read detective novels set in different cities that I've lived in or visited. And, always, I think this is really deeply satisfying and enjoyable. And it always seems a little strange to me that there isn't, a long-running detective series set in Seoul. Seoul seems like, or Busan even, but, Seoul seems like a perfect, location to have a long-running detective series. Almost every big American city or British city or European city, they have, at least one or often several, long-running, best-selling or popular detective series set in the city. For example, Edinburgh has the Ian Rankin novels and Detective Rebus. Dublin, you've got the Dublin Murder Squad novels. Paris has Detective Adamsburg, and so on, right? And in fact, I was at home in Scotland last week, and there's each city, like Aberdeen has a great detective series, Fife has great detective series, Glasgow, Edinburgh. They all have these great sort of series that are working in the genre, and they use the genre to explore the city and the region and the history and the sort of changing social dynamics and, where corruption comes from in the city and, the different, how institutions affect people and people affect institutions. And Seoul just seems ripe for, those types of stories, just genre detective novels about those types of things in Seoul. And, I thought perhaps these books do exist and they just haven't been translated, but I've kind of looked around a little bit and it just doesn't seem to be the case. Crime fiction, detective fiction isn't an indigenous or native genre in Korean writing. So, I think it would be great to see someone, talented Korean novelist like Kim Young-ha or somebody do, intentionally make a series of detective novels set in Seoul or one of the other big cities. I think it could be really fantastic. But anyway, Photoshop Murder sort of gives us a very tantalizing glimpse of what the great, Korean detective series could be. So if you can get your hands on it, I highly recommend it. It really is fantastic. And if you can't get your hands on it, try watching the film on Netflix. The film's called The Scarlet Letter. And just one last thing I'll say before I finish up. There is a second story. There's a second story in this book called Whatever Happened to the Guy Stuck in the Elevator. Also a cracking little story. And I'll come back and I'll review that separately at some point in the future. But anyway, today's story was Photoshop Murder by Kim Young-ha. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.